Good morning. Good morning. Welcome to the Seeker's Quest. I'm Radha Priti, and I have Chaitanya Charan here with me, and Veda Prabhu. Veda Sar's joined us after a week off, so it's good to have you back, Veda.
Thank you for having me back.
Yeah, we missed you. So how are you guys this morning?
I'm doing well, Veda. We are concerned about you. Hope your health is recovered.
Yes, the material body is a beautiful vessel that we have, and sometimes it needs attention. So, yes, things are good now. I've missed both of you and those in our Seeker's Quest community around the world.
Jai.
So let us begin.
Yeah, so I think today we're going to talk about boundaries in love. And this kind of stemmed from our last subject where we talked about love, how love can either transform you or deform you. Is that what we said,
Cece? Yes, transform or deform.
Yeah. Yeah,
I haven't used that word in such a long time, and I haven't heard that word in such a long time.
It was a good podcast. Did you get the chance to listen to it, Veda?
I honestly have not yet.
Okay. Well, it was within that we talked about boundaries in love. We talked about how when you want to tell somebody no, sometimes it's really difficult because you fear a withdrawal of love. And I kind of gave some examples of how I've had experience with that. And CC pointed out that in telling somebody no, you are building respect into the relationship. And with that, the relationship becomes much more authentic and real. And so it was kind of when we were talking about it, we were like, wow, this could be a whole subject of itself. And so we thought we'd kind of start off talking about that today.
Yeah, so one effect predictably that what we fear is it can strain the relationship. Straining of the relationship, that's possible. But another possibility is also actually strengthening of the relationship. Because the other feels rejected or neglected or whatever. But strengthening could be happening, other appreciates us more. Now, this may not happen immediately. Okay. 4 more comes to the fore automatically sometimes. So
what did you say? Effect of it?
No, I was wanting to write more, but I ended up writing 4. So I just changed that.
From what on the left you drafted? Effect of?
When we say no, when you say no to someone in a relationship, they want us to do something and we say no.
Okay.
So what happens by that? One is that the straining of the relationship can happen because the other person feels rejected. But the strengthening of the relationship can happen also because they understand that the other person also understands us more, accepts us more. Okay, this is who you are. This is what you stand for. And if there is going to be a healthy relationship, it cannot be simply a relationship where one person is demanding and another person is giving. It's not a very fulfilling relationship. That's why people may want robots as servants, but people don't want robots as partners or love interests, because we don't want just compliance in a relationship. So we want reciprocation.
Can we spend a little bit more time on that one?
Yeah, definitely. Just quickly, Radha. So we don't want simply. Generally, we are afraid only defiance, rejection. That's not healthy in a relationship. But whatever you tell, I won't do it. But only like capitulation, submission solely in the relationship, that's generally not healthy. So we want some reciprocation in the relationship. There's I do something, you do something. So two distinct individuals are coming together in a relationship. That's the broad theme. Yeah. Would you like to reflect on this?
Yeah, can you go up a little bit again?
Sure, please.
Effect of no in a relationship. You know, as soon as when we say the no, that means we're saying yes to someone or something. So I think it's so beautiful when you put these 2 points there, straining that others feel rejected and strengthening others appreciate us more. I think a lot of the times when I have to say no to someone, it's for me, it's a meditation of self-care, self-love. Like I need time for myself because I think in the world, we are constantly giving, especially those who are on the path of bhakti. This could be a little bit of almost like a little bit of a trap, I feel. That because you're just giving, and you never give yourself the time. But of course, although in giving you receive, which is what we understand in bhakti philosophy, but when we say no to someone, we're saying yes to ourselves. And it's okay to say yes to yourself sometimes. And those that you truly love or that truly love you will realize that it's good that you said no because you're saying yes to yourself and you need a little bit more time by yourself or to do whatever you're doing. So I think if the relationship is mature, when someone says no, you're able to respect that because you're respecting the fact that they're also putting themselves in the equation and not taking themselves out of the equation because we forget ourselves in taking care of others. That's something that I've realized. Radha Priti, your thoughts?
Yeah, that was really good. I was just thinking, I was reflecting back because this is something that I've kind of always struggled with, saying no. And I think I talked about this a little on the last show when I started saying no to people and people weren't used to it. It really made relationships difficult. But what I also saw is relationships, kind of like what CC was saying, relationships that weren't really that strong anyway, just kind of started to fall away. And then that kind of opened the door for me to show up differently and have stronger relationships. And I like this. If you go up a little bit where you said reciprocation. Yeah, right. With the reciprocation in relationships, it's when I think about that, I think like before when I was in the kind of relationships where I was just a yes person and I was just kind of doing whatever the other person wanted, there was no opportunity for the other person to really get to know me or show up for me or understand my feelings, wants, or desires. So in that way, I didn't really feel that close to them. So when I started saying no and the relationship kind of fell away, I was almost like relieved, like, oh, wow, that was more of a burden than really something that I was getting much from. So just the importance in a relationship of both parties showing up and in the mood of like understanding the other person and being there for the other person and allowing the other person to be different than them or to want something different than them or to have different feelings or thoughts or desires. It's like so important in relationships.
I think one point that you just made, it's a big point that I have noticed is when you say no to someone and they leave the relationship, it just means the relationship was a one-sided relationship where they were the dominant one and you were supposed to be the subject and they're the object. And the minute you try to, stand up, just stick your head out of the sand and then everything falls apart. It just means that sometimes that is the situation of being in a very, very toxic relationship. That's something that I've also noticed. And I also feel the relationship, what is the content of the relationship is, I think, is very, very critical, whether this relationship lasts or doesn't last. And I think before we get into a relationship, we have to see what is the content of the relationship. I think most people get into relationships because they feel they need to have someone. There's something missing in themselves. That is the foundation of relationships. So if the content of the relationship is that you feel that you need someone to complete you, or you need a companion, means there's something missing in yourself. Why don't we reevaluate that first? So I think before we get into the crux of the relationship, we have to find the content of the relationship. Is it a partnership? Or is it that, I'm the boss and you just follow whatever I ask you to do?
So what would be the other, if it's not need to feel complete? It is generally, when you're talking about this, I was talking about all this in terms of thinking about all this, in terms of how we talk in the path of bhakti also. That if we have some desire and if we offer some prayer and that prayer is not fulfilled, if people go away from God, then that also indicates that they were not really serious about their relationship with God.
I feel it's true.
In fact, that's the whole theme of 7.16 in the Bhagavad-gita, where it says that people come to God with particular desires, with the divine, and know from the divine basically means they end up with no to the divine.
Mm.
And then that indicates it's more of preliminary or superficial devotion, preliminary devotion it is. And then later in 7.19, Krishna talks about this may take actually lifetimes of spiritual evolution. But when such evolution happens, then despite the same no from the divine, there understands that is the connection with the divine is the supreme blessing. So still there is a yes to the divine, because the different vision here is here we see divine as the source of blessings, source of what I want. But here we see the divine himself as the blessing, is the embodiment of blessings. So to have the divine presence in our Lord, that itself is fulfilling. So as we say, Krishna is Krishna's greatest present, or Krishna's remembrance, Krishna's presence in our heart. Krishna's presence is Krishna's greatest present, we see in the Bhakti tradition. So that dynamic applies in our spiritual path also.
Can we read that real quick? 7:16. I just pulled it open. You said you referenced 7:16 and 7:19. I think it might be nice to read those verses.
Yeah, 7:14, 16 talks about different kinds of people who surrender to approach Krishna, and 7:19 talks about how one who is fully devoted to Krishna. Sure.
So in 7.
Yeah,
sorry?
sure. You want to share the screen, or you just read it out straight?
I'll just read it.
Sure.
So 7:16 is, O best among the Bhartas, 4 kinds of pious men begin to render devotional service unto me: the distressed, the desirer of wealth, the inquisitive, and he who is searching for knowledge of the absolute. So what you're saying is that when somebody is new and not very mature in their relationship with God, they come to God for one of these 4 reasons, which is good, but it's a little bit conditional. It can be a little bit conditional, in that if God doesn't fulfill their desires, they're apt to leave. So
yes,
that's
true.
That's kind of indicative of like a neophyte, like a very new person, very kind of immature relationship with God.
Yes, true.
And then in 7:19 says, after many births and deaths, he who is actually in knowledge surrenders unto me, knowing me to be the cause of all causes and all that is. Such a great soul is very rare. So this is a person who's been around for a while and has kind of come to understand that no doesn't mean the absence of love. It actually means more love.
Yes.
Actually.
True.
And
Fully true.
they use that no to deepen their relationship with God. Veda and I were just talking about this yesterday, actually, and that when we go through some of these obstacles in life, or we go through hard times, or things don't turn out the way that we thought they would or we wanted them to, it really just brings us closer to God. And we can look at it and say, wow, I really needed that in my life to deepen my relationship with God.
That's a good way of looking at it. Not sure whether you want to go in this direction of the relationship with God. It is a bit of a tangent, but
I
Sure.
go further.
I think we should go back to your pendulum. I
Sure.
feel there's so much to unravel on that one.
Yeah, so Veda, I was just asking this question that one is we enter into a relationship because we need to feel complete. What could be the other reason why somebody is entering into a relationship?
Because we are vulnerable.
How is
Vulnerability
that?
is weakness. We
No. So isn't that the same thing? I feel vulnerable. That's why I need someone to complete me. So what would be a healthy reason for entering into the relationship?
So this
Do you
would
think
be like
that's-
the deform. The transform would be like somebody like you want a partner to grow with and be inspired by. I mean, it's hard to really go at it completely by yourself. Even like in spiritual life, we talk about how important association is. So we need to be around people or be connected to people that inspire us to transform, to grow higher.
So I think I'll come to that.
also
Something like there's a fundamental something like insecurity over here. It's not just incompleteness, because everybody feels incomplete. Nobody is complete in themselves. But I think it's that incompleteness which leads to a sense of insecurity, a deep-rooted insecurity that makes one feel not just a need, but almost a clinginess. There's a dependence. And that is where it becomes problematic. We are social creatures. So in one sense, we need,
can we dig a deeper hole in this one?
yeah.
I think that when we say, we don't feel complete, but that incomplete has various dimensions, Prabhu, because I've noticed that sometimes people get into relationships because they just need someone to take care of them. Sometimes they feel incomplete because they're just beaten down and they're sad and depressed, and they feel that having somebody would give them a sense of security. So there is incompleteness has so many different layers of dimensions, because people don't just get into a relationship thinking, okay, I just need someone to add to my life. It's way more than that. Some people.
What about a person at their very healthiest? What, Veda? I think that's what CC's asking us too. Like a person at their very healthiest, what's their motivation for getting into a relationship?
To have a partner, to enjoy life with another person together. So it's the need of partnership. It's the need for, to be able to share whatever you're going to experience in life.
And what's the difference between that and the motive of overcoming insecurity? I guess if you're in that kind of mood where you're looking for a partner to share life, you're probably looking more, hopefully you've got to the point where you recognize that you feel more love by giving than receiving. So you're looking more you're looking more for that kind of relationship, as opposed to what can I get from this relationship? How can I fill up my cup? How can I get rid of my insecurity, as opposed to how can I give to this person? How can I make them happy? How can I enhance their lives? or their life.
Yeah, I was just thinking of drawing something here. So it is, if one person is independent and one person is independent, the other has dependence, then in the long run, that relationship can be unhealthy. But actually, it is independence to interdependence that is healthy. So basically, when two people are independent, they can function independently, and then they seek to be interdependent so that they can grow. That is what is valuable. Mm.
No, this is a very good point.
I like that one too.
So you could have D1 and D2. That's like unhealthy squared, you can say, isn't it? But so D1 is dependent one. You could have dependent one and I will use independent one. This is also unhealthy. You could have, sorry, independent two. The other way also. Now, if you have the healthier one would be, sorry, now if you have D1 and interdependent, I'm using IT2. This is, I'm not sure, this will be a little question mark. The interdependent person would like to rise upward, but basically, you could say interdependent one and independent one, independent two. They come together and they develop a healthy relationship. I'll just delete this part.
So it's basically like both people need to, kind of like what Veda was saying, both people need to be fulfilled in themselves before really even a healthy relationship is possible and coming together. Because as long as one of those two people isn't fulfilled in themselves, then the relationship is kind of lopsided.
Yes, right. I'm not sure fulfilled, because fulfilled is a very big thing. Maybe I would just say somewhat secure,
Mm,
because
that's a good
who in
word.
one sense can be, who can say that they're fulfilled in the world, and we can't really stop having relationships till we are fulfilled. So, so some basic level of security is required. That's how I would see that. Mm.
So that reciprocation where you put in the pendulum in the middle, this is what you're talking about.
Yes, true. When there's a healthy reciprocation. Now, of course, you could say in a parent-child relationship, there is always the sense of dependence and independence. The parent has to be independent and the child is dependent. But then you could say that if you have a parent-child relationship, the healthy relationship will be where the dynamic changes. So you could say initially it's almost like the parent and the child, but as the child grows up, as the child grows up further, eventually they come to the level more or less they are equal. So this is you could say the healthy growth. So healthy growth would be, the best parents are those who actually train their children to be able to live and function without them. Isn't it?
Mm. Yeah, that's interesting. I like what you just drew there. It's almost like when we talk about coming into a relationship and having enough security within yourself, it's almost like that putting on your own oxygen mask before you put on others. Because you really, unless you're secure in yourself, if you partner up with somebody else, you're just going to be taking out your own insecurities on that person, which is going to be destructive to both yourself and the other person. So it's like before even pursuing a relationship, better to like check yourself and give yourself that time and space to really develop a level of security and a level of comfortability with yourself before bonding with somebody else. One, because it will be healthier, but two, because you're only going to attract somebody that's at the same level of healthiness or security that you are. That's just like the way that it works, right? So the more that you can work on yourself and grow yourself, even the better partner that you'll attract.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I do this in one of my retreats that I do. I focus a lot of emphasis on this. before you get into any relationship, even with God, you should first find out, why do you want a relationship? And then first, identify, if you can, who you are, define who you are and why you need a relationship, and then jump into it. Before you answer these two questions, don't get into a relationship, because otherwise, relationships, it's just an emotional bond of something that is lacking emotionally, or something that is lacking in you, some emotional need. To fulfill that, we get into these relationships. In India, it's a little different, because I know sometimes in India it's arranged marriages and there's many other different equations. But I've noticed in the West, I just want to be with somebody. And they think that's good enough. But I think it should be a little bit deeper thought. And these questions that we're presenting, I think, is very powerful.
What do you just said though?
I would say even in India, what I'm noticing is parents want their children to be capable of independence. Even that's why there is a significant emphasis on even girls, daughters getting well educated, having employment. So there is that recognition that that total dependence can be unhealthy.
Mm.
So I think in the past also there was the extended support system of the extended family, which would help. So now it is different.
Radha, Priti, you were going to say?
Yeah,
I
please
don't
go
know.
ahead.
I just felt like I kind of disagreed with something that you said when you said that even before you get in a relationship with God, that I feel like no matter where you are, how you are, getting in a relationship with God is always a positive thing. Right? Like it's the one relationship that if you are really insecure, can bring you to a place of security.
Okay, I should explain myself when I said that. I felt like, when we get into a relationship with God, if we don't ask who we are and why we need God in our lives, then that relationship sometimes have a tendency to be shallow. And if some things don't work out our way, we're like, yeah, God, you're never there for me. You're just a figment of somebody's imagination, so let me live my life. You do your thing, let me do my thing, So I still felt that if we don't ask that question to ourselves, I don't feel like we're giving our intelligence an opportunity to participate in this process.
Okay, so get like clear and deliberate about your intentions.
Yes.
Yeah, I was thinking more in terms of when you said that generally we don't really have a relationship with God directly. It is through someone. And the relationship with God is never unhealthy. But say, for example, there can be someone who teaches us a conception of God, and God as an angry God and we always feel guilty. That can be harmful. So is it an unhealthy relationship with God, or is it an unhealthy relationship with that person? I mean, that person, maybe there's no controlling cleric in our life, no controlling priest or spirituality, but even then, that conception is controlling us. So yes, it's a completely different psychology when it comes to God. But that, actually speaking, how are we entering into a relationship with Him? Are we like one adult entering into another relationship with another adult, or are we like a child entering with, will take care? So will which is it actually? So it needs to be carefully examined. So overall, I think that, as you rightly said, this is the relationship of the human with the divine is ultimately at one level a relationship of dependence, because we can't even exist without God. So in one sense, if you consider at ontological level, at ontological existential level, we can't even exist without God. But at the same time, it is at an emotional or a functional level, there has to be a certain level of independence. If that is not there, then that person, maybe when they begin, they are helpless, but eventually if they're not, they don't become independent, and it is a problem eventually. So I agree that both aspects are there in this relationship. Anyway, you
Yeah.
want to go ahead?
Could we talk a little bit about the bhakti path and the relationship of student and teacher? And you kind of talked about it. You kind of said a little bit like your relationship with God is through another person, oftentimes. So I feel like something I struggled with when I came into bhakti is I felt like I needed to do everything my teachers told me to. And I feel like that narrative is kind of endorsed or can be kind of endorsed in some of our teachings. So it can be a little bit confusing, this dichotomy that you make your spiritual progress by doing what your teachers tell you to. Where is the line there between, okay, whatever my teachers tell me to, I'm doing because that's how I make spiritual progress, versus actually, I don't really feel comfortable with that, or this is too much for me. I don't really want to take this on, or I just don't agree with that. I don't want to do it. When is it okay to say that and not risk making spiritual progress?
Sorry, if I understand your question, that there is some expectation made from us by God, and we want to say no to that, or by some teacher who represents God.
Yeah, I'm more talking about the relationship between student and teacher in bhakti.
It's a complex one, but we'll have CC start it off.
Or even elders in bhakti. When you say, oh, how can I serve you? And they say, oh, you can do this, this, and this, but you don't really totally align with this, this, and this. Is it that we should just do it anyway and keep our mouth shut? Or should we say, actually, I don't really align with this, this, and this because of this. I recognize you're my elder, but I don't really think that's the right way to do it. Is that disrespectful? Am I not going to make progress in my spiritual life because I'm communicating that?
So I would say that if we are a spiritual student communicating with the spiritual teacher, the normal dynamic is thought of as the instruction. But overall, it does become negotiation. It's sometimes discussion, negotiation. We have this story of Prince Dhruva. His guru tells him a particular thing when he says, he's candid and says, I don't think I can do this. And then his guru gives him a different kind of instruction, and he finds that helpful. He goes with that. So his guru himself, so I would say negotiation is required. We have to be authentic. This is something which doesn't work for me. I don't think like this. I don't function like this. This is against who I am. So I don't think there's any problem with that intrinsically. Veda, you want to add something?
Yeah, I think this whole relationship between a student and a teacher, it's a very sensitive relationship, because the teacher represents, what we call God, and that's almighty, all powerful. And sometime in Bhakti traditions, it's also said that teachers are seen like, God themselves. So when that hype is there, then there is a problem. So that's why I like when you put the point of negotiation. Narada, who's the teacher, who's the most elevated, exalted, eternally liberated teacher, and he's got a 5-year-old student, and he's giving that boy the space to negotiate. This is a real teacher to me, because teachers who are on that level will actually negotiate, will actually work with you where you're at. And that's why that dynamic that you brought up between Dhruva, that young prince, and Narada, I think it's so proper to understand this whole principle of negotiation, how important it is. And a teacher who's not ready to negotiate, say you do it this way, or, I have some reservations when I hear that. And here in this example, you're seeing a 5-year-old kid negotiating with the teacher, like, it's too much for me, this I can't do. And the teacher is so kind and loving and compassionate and works with the student to make sure that the student can be brought up to a certain pace. So this negotiation, I feel, comes with mature teachers. And teacher who's not ready to negotiate and wants you to bend, I think will just crack. So that will be my 2 cents on this, Radha Priti.
No, it's helpful. Thank you.
Yeah. So I was thinking that when we talk about relationship, even the idea of a spiritual teacher, there is a feeling of dependence. But the point is not that the feeling of dependence has to be perpetual or perpetuated. It is actually meant to help the individual become independently thoughtful. And the world is a complex place and I don't know what to do. So I would like guidance, but eventually the best teachers are those who make themselves redundant. They're the teachers who speak and teach in such a way that people can function even in their absence. That students can function even in their absence. That is the kind of teacher we really need. And if you have those kinds of teachers, that's a great thing.
Yeah, because then you can develop almost a codependent relationship with your teacher where you feel like in their absence, you won't have God anymore. So therefore you do whatever they want to preserve the relationship. And that's unhealthy on both counts, right?
Yeah, perfectly true.
Sometimes I think of how a teacher and a student, it is a relationship of empowerment. And unless and until we teach our students to be independently thoughtful, there is no empowerment. They're completely dependent on your guidance and your powers. But when the minute we are able to train them to be independently thoughtful, what we are literally doing is really giving them all the powers to grow and to help others grow and glow. I think this is what real empowerment is.
Now, as a teacher, I got to imagine that it's different for different people, though. Like you could probably recognize people that can have more space to be independently thoughtful, and people that if you give them that much of a rope, they'll hang themselves because they're just not there. They're going to make decisions and that aren't healthy, and their perspectives are going to be flawed. So I imagine that's got to be difficult as a teacher, even to make that differentiation of how long that rope should be for a person.
Yeah, I think that's where it's a personal relationship, isn't it? The rope has to be there, but can we have enough freedom that we can hang ourselves? Yeah, definitely. Yeah, but can we also have such a short rope that that shortness of the rope chokes us? It's also possible. So in general, the middle way, the Bhagavad-gita talks about many places where the middle way, regulated. So for example, not too much eating, not too much sleeping. So we could have two Too long a rope, you hang yourself. But then too short a rope, you get suffocated, you get choked. So we don't want either of those. Somewhere in the middle way is what is the challenge. I think one of the areas where I encountered this a lot is with parenting. Although I'm a monk, people often ask me, parents, when I stay with some of our devotees, they ask about guidance on parenting. I can talk about principles. I don't have much practical experience. But here you see that in general, the American or the Western parenting model is to give a longer rope. That let them learn from their mistakes. And then the Indian parenting model is let them not commit any mistakes. Give a shorter rope. So I think it a lot depends on the culture and the upbringing, which will be more emphasized, which will be less emphasized.
So what did you put in the middle of this pendulum?
Mm. Well, it's like a non-answer. Whether I so the right length for growth, whatever it is, and this will actually, as I said, that's what I was trying to get towards this. There is this in the broad Vedic context. There is the Desha Kala Patra, Sanskrit word that means place, time, and sometimes this word is used candidate. It can be candidate, it can be circumstance, both. So it's what will be right for different people will depend on different things.
In America, when people take the dogs out for a walk, the leash is actually very, very long, but they don't use the full leash. They don't let them have the full leash. And they just, as soon as it goes a little too far, they just press the button and the dog can't go very far. So is there such a thing in spiritual life? You give them a leash, don't give them a big one. You give them a big one, but you control it so they can't use the whole thing to hang themselves.
So how is that done exactly? The dogs play around, but if they go too far, then the leash restrains them.
Yeah, they just press the button and the leash won't go anymore.
Oh, you press a button.
It's retractable. It's a retractable leash.
So you don't have to pull also. It just press it.
Yeah.
You don't have to push. You don't have to pull. So I'm wondering if there's such a thing in Bhakti, like this dog leash, retractable dog leash.
I don't know whether I should feel intrigued or insulted. Basically, you're basically comparing, can we treat humans like dogs? Physically. Retractable leash.
No, I was thinking that too, though, like a good parent or a good teacher, like when a child is really young, they're very, very dependent and they almost need to be for survival. But to your point, as the child gets older, the parent should be working to make it such that the child can make healthy decisions on their own and is empowered to do so. And in that way can again kind of lengthen what we're calling the leash, but kind of open up their space to function. And if the parent doesn't or the teacher doesn't, it's probably more related to their own attachment or that teacher or parent's own attachment or dependence on the child or the student to fulfill some kind of their needs, such that they're not really able to show up fully in that relationship for that child or student. And in that way, the teacher or the parent is not fully mature.
Yeah, this is a complex psychological concept. Some people are dependent on, you could say, their dependence on them.
Yeah.
So this is considered quite unhealthy. That means if the other person is not dependent on me, then who am I? What will I do? So it is at one level, we have a need to feel needed. But when that need to feel needed becomes toxic, then rather than, so healthy is, you could say healthy is seek or find someone who needs us. Like say the natural growth is when parents take care of the child, children grow up. And over a period of time, the parents are centered only on the children and the children go from their homes. The parents are feeling like the nest has become empty. What do we do now? So, but eventually maybe they have grandchildren and they take care of the grandchildren. But the unhealthy way this need for needed is expressed is by force someone to need us. That means don't let them grow, don't let them develop the skills by which they can do what they need to do for their own growth. That can be quite unhealthy. So if you see in the Bhagavad-gita, it talks about the demoniac mentality, and it's interesting that the Gita talks about demoniac mentality both at a gross level and at a subtle level. At a gross level, it just destroy your enemies. That how dare you challenge me? I will end your existence. But at a subtle level, it is more of manipulate your dependents or manipulate your subordinates, even your supporters, so that they stay dependent, so that they become more and more dependent. So that is quite dangerous. A person gets joy only when they are surrounded by their dependents and the dependents are constantly appreciating them, glorifying them, pampering their ego. And some people do that in such a way that they actually get to manipulate others for that purpose.
I think you just summarized the whole world governance. You know how the media companies, we are constantly being manipulated, and they are made us so dependent on technology and social media. It's like, it's insane. So I think this is summarizing the world that we live in.
Yes. True.
And that one's so tricky. I feel like I've had relationships with both kinds of people here. And with people, the gross that you described, sometimes it's like, even though it's more aggressive, sometimes it's like better because at least you can see where they stand. The subtle, it's like sometimes you don't even know it's happening until it's happened. And then you're like, oh my gosh, what did I get myself into? So that's a tricky one.
You know, sometimes
Yeah.
I think, Prabhu, I was thinking sometimes how in other ages, the demoniac people, they literally just said, hey, you got a problem with me? Let's pull up some weapons and just fight it out. And this age, they don't do that. They're very cowards. They want to use all this means to make you more and more dependent. So I think that it's a very interesting relationship that we have, that the real demoniac natured people have become smarter in the age of Kali. It seems like, or less moral. like the demoniac people in other ages.
That's an
At this,
interesting insight. Yeah, I agree with you in one sense at least. Definitely there is a greater subtlety, greater strategy, greater cunning involved in controlling people. It's to some extent also because there are resources like technology available, and there is also a greater assertion of autonomy by people in general. And also, if there is this, also if you generally, if a person has no fear of God, that is the person who needs to be the most feared, because that person will have no boundaries. Just even in the background, if somebody has that understanding that there is a higher being to whom I'm accountable, and that keeps the person at least within some boundaries of civility, sanity, humanity, something like that. But all boundaries can be flouted if that person has no spiritual, theistic, higher dimension to their life or higher conception in their lives. You were saying something, Radha Devi. I didn't let you speak at that time.
no, I was just thinking, kind of along that same line. It brings you back to the importance. Like I'm thinking, like, wow, this is so complex. How do you avoid getting yourself into these kinds of situations? Because it can be really difficult. And in this age of Kali Yuga, it's everywhere. These kinds of unhealthy relationship dynamics. And so I'm thinking, like, wow, how do you really guard yourself against this? And I come back to what we were talking about at the beginning of this episode, and that you really get secure in who you are and who you're not. And for me, the only thing that really felt right or satisfied me in that was recognition and realization of my relationship with God and what that is. And once I was able to really embrace that fully, then it was like these kinds of behaviors became even easier to see in other people, and I was able to navigate relationships with people in a healthier way. But until I really stepped into that identity that I am a servant of God and that I'm part of a divine and that my soul is part of God, I wasn't able to really step away from any of this.
Yeah. And this is a subject we had discussed briefly earlier. That how our vertical relationship with the divine also helps us improve our horizontal relationships.
Yeah,
So,
because it becomes like your North Star that then you can fit everything else around. And if somebody wants you to do something that doesn't align with growing that relationship, then it's real easy to see, yeah, I'm not interested. And also, your relationship with God is really just growth in love. It's like choosing love. So then it's really easy to see when the other person is trying to get you to choose something other than love, because you've centered your priority in your life around growing that relationship, which is, again, based on love. So it becomes, does that make sense?
yeah, it's a good theme. And that the divine relationship is centered on love, then we can discern what is love. Maybe we could discuss this in a future podcast again. This is an important theme. Veda, do you want to add something
Yeah,
before
I
I
really
summarize?
like this. I really like this point that you continuously make, that and it should be the theme of all relationship discussions, which is that unless we have a vertical relationship, no horizontal relationships will ever be complete. Because horizontal relationships are our material is based on matter, and it is something that only remains in this world. It doesn't go beyond matter. And so as soon as we go vertical, then even these horizontal relationships are so blissful and so manageable and so loving, and it's so relishable. So I think this is something that I always think of your quote whenever I think of any relationships, that unless there's vertical relationships, good luck with your horizontal relationships being successful.
Yeah,
Yeah.
nice way of putting it. The spectrum, they're relishable, or at least they are manageable. Otherwise, it's unmanageable, it's unbearable, it's intolerable, and that's definitely a problem. So yeah, let's discuss this more maybe in a future session. So, should I summarize now?
Yes, please.
So we started today by discussing about the whole dynamic of how no in a relationship, how it can either strengthen the relationship, it can have positive effect, or it can have a negative effect. And that connection, I discussed about why the purpose of the relationship itself. You want to look at that. It could be out of insecurity. So there I discussed about the idea of somebody's dependence as compared to there is sharing and growing, which can be broadly done by people who have independence, and then they move from independence toward interdependence. And in that connection, we also discuss how the same thing applies to vertical relationships, and how even to our relationship with the divine. We went in that direction briefly, but the idea of a teacher-student relationship also, it's not just instruction. It also has to be negotiation. Then discussed about how dependence. Some people need that dependence. If that is needed, it can also force people to try to control others by keeping them unprepared to face life, keeping them unequipped for life. And then so here there could be growth where people are just forced and threatened and destroyed. Here we talk in something the demoniac mentality. A growth where they subtly they manipulate and keep them dependent. So that's especially dangerous. And the last point we discussed was about how the vertical relationship can actually help us balance of the vertical and the horizontal relationships. So thank you very much. Hare Krishna.
Thank you.
Thank you.